Welcome back to this episode of the Coleman Nation. Today, we're going to talk about something that's important to me and I think important to all of us, which is what is the difference between actual justice and social justice? Is there some overlap? Do the concepts, coincide at different points? Are they completely different and disparate and they don't mix? Let's explore that and other concepts having to do with justice on today's episode of the Coleman Nation. Let's go. Welcome back to the Coleman Nation. I'm super excited for today's episode. I've been watching what's happening with, various trials in DC over the last 6 months, year, going on forever. Basically in the past, I've watched everything from Daniel Penny to George Floyd to President Trump and the Bidens and everyone in between. Recently, two events made me realize that a frank discussion on justice is merited. I'll detail these events later in the episode, but what we will cover today is actual justice versus social justice, my thoughts on the matter, and a good way to approach real justice. First, let's define what justice actually is. I was talking to one of my friends about his son, who was around 11 or 12 years old at the time. His son was getting into fights, but this didn't happen because he was a naturally aggressive kid. When my friend dug under the surface, he found that his son was trying to defend some of the littler kids in his school against bullies. And to me, I'm sitting there thinking like, well, this kid's a hero, this should be something that we lift up. Obviously having that environment of bullying is completely unacceptable. And I think that most of us, if we're raised well and, we have this inherent sense of wanting to make things right, I think that that's what was happening with, my friend's son. I think that most people have just an inherent, innate sense of justice. We know when something's right and we know when something's wrong. Unfortunately, though, society has colored the water on this topic, tinging the perception of what justice actually is. That inherent gut instinct that we have for justice has been compromised through various different types of ideologies. And we're not talking about any particular one. It's just there's very specific thoughts about the subject of justice. And I think that it's been, just sort of watered down, so to speak, and misinterpreted on a bunch of different avenues, right? So when we talk about justice, I think that as a species, we can peacefully coexist without stepping on each other's toes. But every now and again, we have what I would consider a cancerous cell within society. That little cell in this analogy is going in and destroying everyone else's right or desire to freely live their lives, to have a family, to raise kids, to go to work, to have a job, to find fulfillment, to go to church, to not go to church. You have some rogue actor that comes in and then starts to negatively affect everyone else. Well, that is trouble for society. So let's take an example of going on a bus. Everyone's on this bus. Everyone's trying to make a living. Everyone's trying to get back to their families. Everyone's trying to go to school. And then some guy jumps on the bus and he's swinging around a baseball bat, threatening to harm you and the people on the bus. The guy is obviously crazy. So what is happening is you have all of these people happily living their lives and they've all been caught in this moment where you've got a rogue actor that is threatening this particular group of people. What could happen? That person could go completely nuts and destroy everybody on the bus, or the people on the bus could turn around and prevent that person from affecting their lives in a detrimental and possibly permanent way. This is what justice is. When the collective group says that a particular person or other similar group within that group is threatening the collective survival, then the hammer needs to be dropped on that one person or that faction of society in order to be able to continue the collective benefit of the entire group. Humanity is such an incredible species. In real time, we're making decisions all day, every day about what is best for our survival. This becomes a very clear-cut case of how to survive. Take a serial killer as an example. I grew up in Seattle, and I remember as a kid in the early 1980s, everyone was all freaked out about the Green River Killer. I didn't even fit the profile of those people that he was killing, young teenage prostitutes, but I was terrified at 7 years old that this guy was going to come get us, right? Every time I turned on the news, there was some new thing, and I had no idea of how to differentiate, this terrifying incident from what was going on in my life. As a little kid, I couldn't even drink a can of what we had at the time was called Green River soda without thinking about this guy who was running around and killing all these people. I actually think about it now and I'm like, Green River soda. I should probably have a second thought about drinking something called Green River soda, but it was really good. But anyways, you get someone who's a serial killer and society has to jump in because there's too much danger to everyone else in society. There are too many opportunities to cut short the lives of too many people that are participating in building civilization. You can also take someone like Hitler. Hitler is a good example of this because Hitler comes along and is train wrecking all of Europe, picking fights with everyone, destroying the entire population of Jews in Germany, and then pressing that out into the rest of Europe. Obviously, someone's got to stop him, and thank God the US and the Allies came in and put an end to that monster. If they hadn't, he would have run rampant through Europe and Asia, causing untold amounts of destruction because he was literally insane. So this concept of justice is deeply rooted in our collective impulse to survive. You can look at it from this perspective. The white blood cell. You have all these red blood cells that are just minding their own business, doing their own thing. The white blood cells are the arbiters of justice against cancer cells, viruses, and any unfriendly bacteria running rogue throughout the body. All of a sudden, all the red blood cells and different cells within the body all go, hey, we've got a situation here, and bang, white blood cells produce antibodies to eliminate the threat. The rest of the machine can continue to function without tremendous detriment. To a certain extent, society and the human body are mirrors of each other. The natural or inherent justice that we all feel is similar to that of my friend's kid. He couldn't stand to see other kids hurt and wanted to right that wrong. I think that a lot of people in society inherently have that white blood cell instinct. Maybe some have forgotten that or are not wired that way, but most people are. So this definition of justice, I think, is a good one. When you have something that is going to impinge upon the collective survival of everyone at hand, something needs to come in and go, okay, we're going to knock that threat out. That's what justice has meant many times throughout human civilization. Recently, though, I've come to learn about a new concept, which is called social justice. Look at some of the cities, San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York, and some of the district attorneys that are in those cities. You have Bragg in New York, Fannie Wilson in Atlanta, and Gascon in Los Angeles. Their concept of justice is quite different from the concept of justice that I just outlined. This new definition of justice is balancing the scales. This means wanting to create an equitable outcome. The danger is that there can never be parity between those who desire destruction and those who are just trying to get along and get on with their lives. You can't administer a system of justice that is trying to have an equitable outcome for everybody to the point where a criminal appears to have the same rights as a non-criminal, rights that are now being violated. The social justice view is that referring to the criminal, what choice did that person have? Well, I'm going to tell you, and this goes back to the concept of responsibility that we've covered in other episodes. You either believe that people have agency and the right to choose, and that they choose their own actions, or you believe that they cannot choose their own actions, that they are simply stimulus response machines, as we've discussed in other episodes. If you think that people have the right and the ability to choose, that we're responsible for our own choices, and we hold everyone to that standard, then the concept of social justice begins to fall apart. It falls apart because every person that committed a crime would have to, at some point, A, have made the decision that they're going to do that thing, and B, carried through with the actions, and C, infringed upon others' freedom to live their lives, and then D, have had society collectively intervene in order to correct. With a social justice view, we go, in a microcosm, a person's rights have been violated. They're going to jail. They didn't choose that. That's not right. This is the quote unquote logic of today's modern justice system. We're fighting for the little guy, and yet women, children, and the working class all suffer if those who would harm them aren't being brought to actual justice. There were many different things that had this concept scratching at the back of my brain for the last several months. But two things that made me want to bring it up now as content for, an episode of Coleman Nation was, number one, was the case against Daniel Penny. Jordan Neely died as a result of Daniel Penny intervening to protect people on a New York City subway. The prosecutors in New York decided it was negligent homicide, and then it became a charge of second-degree manslaughter, for which Penny was ultimately found not guilty. That was utterly shocking to a great many people. In this case, actual justice and social justice were literally going head-to-head. It was a fascinating observation to behold. One side was completely on the side of Jordan Neely, the guy who was threatening to kill people on the subway. The prosecuting attorney's concept of justice was that Neely was just lost, a victim of the system. You should really go and look up her justifications for what Neely was doing and how he should have been treated. Well, to most people, it would to most sane people, it would boggle the mind. But again, it goes back to choice. Did Neely choose these actions? Is he being held responsible? Should he have even been out there in the first place? The second event that inspired this episode of Coleman Nation is the case of Luigi Mangione, who shot and killed United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson. I was shocked that the public outcry was not against the perpetrator of the murder, but against the victim. The consensus was Thompson deserved it. He was a serial killer himself, quote unquote. That's what they said. Through the number of claims his company denied that wound up with the deaths of people, if that is true, right, then there are actual channels of real justice that should have been brought to bear. The way I look at the world is that there's actual justice. I've done my best to define actual justice here. Then there's social justice, which again is an equal outcome for all. And I should mention that many of the elements that comprise social justice, and they'll be the first to admit it, are rooted in communist Marxism, in which everyone is equal. For society to grow, improve, and evolve to the next level, we really must get our heads straight about justice as a concept. One idea of justice is where everyone can propel themselves along a given path and are allowed to help themselves and their families to grow and prosper. At the end of that road, we've got a great high-trust society. But if we have a subjective, ambiguous definition of justice rooted in vengeance and equity, I think that we're going to have a very disparate, confused system. But my question is this: what do you think? What's your concept of justice? Am I hitting the right marks? Do you think that society owes the downtrodden masses, or do you think that the people in a general sense have the right to be able to pursue life, liberty, and happiness as a group? I'm interested to hear what your comments are. We can only have progress for our collective species by engaging in thoughtful dialogue. Make sure that you leave some comments below. Make sure that you hit the subscribe button. Make sure that you turn on the notifications if you want to be the first person to get the notice of the next episodes. And until the next time that we meet, thanks for tuning in to this episode of Coleman Nation. Take care.